Good day, folks, all of our valued viewers at home and abroad. This is Talking Point here on WESN. Sean Michael Small, once again, before you to have the important discussions of the day. Now, I did say yesterday that my co-host and I will be going over the Prime Minister's and the Ministers of National Security, some of their offerings at the previous PNM Town Hall meeting on last week, Thursday. Some important things to kind of discuss. Unfortunately, my co-host won't be able to join us. However, we're going to continue with that topic, though, because we don't want it to get too old, and some interesting claims were made, some implications were made. But before we get into that, just before, I wanted to make mention of a few things. We're not going to have a traditional daily review for this day's edition of Talking Point. But just to mention a few things, first of all, the Industrial Court got 5 new members. It'll be interesting to see now that the previous president of the court, well, obviously she's no longer there, and to some extent, maybe you could assume a lot of the decisions the court made was guided by her presence. Now, what will the Industrial Court look like moving forward? It was one of the areas where I think there was at least a perception of objectivity or a bit of pro-labor bias, which is not necessarily bad, depending on having a check on, big business employers, as well as government, which is one of the main employers in TNT, one of the largest employers, if not the largest employer in TNT. So it'll be interesting to see that. Then there's another story with the former CEO of TSTT, Lisa Agard, who brought up 2 important points that I want people to focus on. First of all, the conditions of the management change in TSTT was not made clear to us when it happened at the time, but she basically said, I did not resign, and added on, I was not given a chance to resign. And then she went on to say that, the comments of the current CEO, which apparently is implicating her with regards to the misinformation on the TSTT hack, which the minister did apologize in Parliament last week for, she is basically refuting that and is warning her successor with regards to such sorts of claims that she is prepared to take legal action, basically saying it's slanderous. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. I do think potentially the issue of the minister's mistaken phrasing might have been a combination of technical misunderstanding by the higher-ups, because most of the higher-ups don't really understand the technical aspects of certain things like telecommunications, digitization, etc., etc. I mean, the Minister of Finance basically just uses buzzwords all the time. To be fair, though, he has not made necessarily any mistakes. The Minister of Public Utilities has. It could be a misunderstanding, and as well as also it could just be the complications of the moment and to some extent a debate on semantics. I don't necessarily see it as a huge error on the part of the minister, but depending on how the politics goes and how people view it, and then now wanting to potentially try to shift blame, it's funny how by trying to shift blame or assign blame, it potentially takes the situation and blows it up a little bit further. And then finally, just one of the more recent, or the continuation of follow-up, we got the Commission of Inquiry report more or less on the Paria tragedy. The Prime Minister himself is not really making any comments. I think no one really in the government is. We know that it's been sent to the office of the DPP. We know that it's been sent to the Industrial Court by OSHA. They sent their own report, I believe, sometime either around the time when it was given to the president. I think it might have been just after. Sometime between then and now when it was laid in Parliament, OSHA made that move already. I believe they were to some extent waiting on the Commission of Inquiry to finish, and they are still within the window. It ends on February 24th, on when the Industrial Court, when they could take it to the court to take legal action on that front. There are calls for, of course, the firing of the board, firing of the chairman of Paria's parent company, Petroleum Holdings Limited, Mr. Commoner. I'm not entirely too sure. I guess if you fire the board of Paria, then Mr. Commoner's position becomes a little bit shakier. One thing that the opposition is calling for is the removal of the Minister of Energy, which I actually don't agree with, in part because, not just because of all of the other things he does outside of this situation, but in this situation, he was one of the few people to actually do something useful at the high-end level of management and communication. It wasn't up to him, technically speaking, and maybe behind closed doors, unofficially, somebody in the government made that call, but that would be pure speculation. The management, at the end of the day, they bear the brunt of the blame on that. The board, of course, bears the brunt of the blame of, overseeing the management. The minister, on the other hand, it seemed as though he knew to some extent what the right thing was to do, at least with regards to communicating to the public, and he attempted to make up that shortfall. To what extent he actually has control over who is appointed, there are political appointments. Yes, he's the line minister, but I always say with regards to a lot of ministries, to some extent, it's not all up to them, especially when it comes to resources. And one would probably consider, in many ways, big-time political appointments is not just going to be left to the line minister, no matter who it is, maybe unless you call him a bit. But it will have to go through cabinet and to the people in cabinet who are the seniors, who are the firsts among equals, basically. One could argue it would have to go through the Prime Minister as well as the party mechanisms. Now we get in more into speculation and implications as we go on, which is why I'm not so comfortable now trying to make definite statements once we go past the management. However, I'm all for considering, personally, I think they should go. I don't have any technical reasons why or arguments. That's just my gut feeling on the situation, on my read of the situation. That's not enough. I get it. That's the emotional response. I have it too. So the board, which includes the husband of one Speaker of the House and then the chairman of the holding company above, who knows, right, how that will go. Probably they will not be removed, I think, Paris board. However, that would send a clear message about consequences for a lack of proper oversight. And maybe it should end there. But I don't think we get rid of probably one of the few ministers that actually does any work. See, that's the other part of it. Now, let's go on to the PNM Town Hall meeting that was held, I believe it was last Thursday, and they actually had a post-cabinet press conference before on Thursday as well. But we'll stick to the town hall meeting. Let's not dilute the conversation, because at the meeting, it seemed as though it was a political rally to some extent to counter what went on with the opposition leaders' town hall meeting on crime. And the way how both are framed is interesting, because on one hand, yes, obviously it was a UNC function, but it was done under the office of the opposition leader. They did not have any of the trappings of the UNC, really, that I could see it. There wasn't a lot of rising suns and yellow flags and blue shirts, etc., at that symposium, meeting, what have you. And most of the speakers, I think, were not affiliated with the UNC, or at least half. There was the opposition leader, and I believe Gary Griffith. But there were others who spoke, who was reported, that were technically outside of the party structure. Whereas the PNM came, and they had a political rally almost. Everything was draped in red. All the supporters were there. I mean, obviously, the opposition leader had her supporters at her function. But how it was framed as a PNM thing, as opposed to, I believe it should have been under the Office of the Minister of National Security or under the National Security Council. But it is what it is. I think that was a slight communication error by the PNM. That said, they made some claims, some of which had to do with the political side of the crime talks, and some of it had to do with finding solutions. And that's where we're going to start off. The Prime Minister actually, towards the end of his speech, which was when he gave one of the few new plans or ideas about how this government intended to try to deal with the surge in violent crime. So let's take a listen now and cue this.
Special problems require special responses. And I will tell you, as I continue to examine my responsibility of Prime Minister, I have now come to the conclusion that we need special intervention in some of those communities that are nurseries for criminal conduct. And insofar as there are officials who can broadcast as loudly as they can that the police have no leadership and the police commissioner is no good and every policeman is a waste of time, giving confidence to the criminals that they could embark on their criminality with impunity. I want to tell them tonight, in those communities that you will see named in the very near future, I will instruct the Minister of Finance to identify immediately $100 million to go inside those communities and do what is not being done, because criminals in there have taken control of those streets and those houses and are making it difficult for government services to go in there and give some people an opportunity for a decent life. There are communities here in the East-West Corridor and elsewhere where a handful of criminals, like Mr. Hines told you, we're going to put up lights in our community, and some miscreant telling them he don't want no lights there. Well, there will be light, because the money that we'll make available, as I'm describing here, will be made available to the Defense Force leadership to retain and to hire reserve officers or retired officers and recruits to go into those communities and ensure that what has to be built is built, where security has to be on the street is there, and where people can rely on them and not on the local don who believes that they're somehow bigger than the government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I have faced this before. I was in the parliament when we had a budget, and the budget had in it a program of affirmative action to treat with young men in the urban areas who had begun to drift away into criminality. And that program was meant to stop that. You know how the UNC described that program? Discrimination. And my party, the PNM, on that occasion, shied away from doing that and go and tell the country that what is in the budget document is a misprint. And they accused me of racism. Well, the chickens have come home to roost. That was 15 years ago. So the boy who was born on that day is 15 years now, and who was 10 years old then is 25 years old. So when I do what I say I'm going to do now, I'm broke no obstruction from anybody on the other side. I will do what has to be done.
Now, it's interesting, the plan, we didn't actually get a lot of details exactly how this will unfold, but it seems somewhat straightforward. One of the issues that we have with community development, because you want to provide community with things, right, to improve their standard of living, to make their lives easier, to make their lives better. And then when that happens, it's easier for them to concentrate on the areas that matter, right? When you don't have enough street lights, petty crime is a lot easier. And then you spend a lot of time having to worry about petty crime. You spend a lot of time worrying about your kids getting involved in petty crime. But when you have a proper functioning community, you don't necessarily have all of those concerns, and it makes security more or less easier. You know, the community itself, there's light, you could see what's going on. The police themselves could patrol and not necessarily have to try and peer into the darkness when they drive past. So I think it's a good idea. I don't know if $100 million is enough, because the thing is, he speaks about being deprived of certain amenities, right? And it's all well and good to have a security element. Think about, at the end of the day, it comes back down to one of the basic calls on how to deal with crime. More boots on the ground, more boots on the ground. I don't know if this will actually be enough money to supply the wages for the various individuals you're speaking about, and I'll more on that later, to cover all the areas that might need to be covered. Because it's not just about going to a place that maybe has a rundown facility, you want to renovate it, and you don't want the local crime lord, because he likes to use this park for, his street level dealers, and he don't want lights on this park because then, nobody gonna come and buy their illegal goods, right? He don't want the place to be built up. He wants the status quo maintained. And it's not enough to have a security element to prevent him from interfering with the status quo. You need to keep that element there. You need to keep that presence there if you want the community to no longer be under the thumb of the local gang lord. Otherwise, he'll just come back, break all the lights, vandalize whatever he wants to vandalize, and return things right back to the way they were. So this is not just a temporary measure, and that's why I say I don't know if $100 million is enough, because for each community that you deploy personnel in, potentially they might have to stay there for quite some time until we could get our crime situation at a healthier, stabilized position. Now, who will be retained or hired? He said reserve officers or retired officers and recruits. Technically speaking, not everybody in the Defense Force is an officer, right? They are enlisted personnel. Some eventually become non-commissioned officers. And of course, you have the actual commissioned officers themselves. Officers, whether commissioned or non-commissioned, would have more experience, would tend to, or in theory, have better judgment because they should have things like leadership experience as well as just overall general experience. So I don't know if he was speaking about that. Again, this is where we have someone who is somewhat of a layman on a technical issue, or if he was using officers to speak to some extent to retired police officers, because therein lies the other issue. To what extent now do we want retired soldiers left to their own devices to have to, act as security against a criminal element? I would think a mix of retired soldiers, retired officers, recruits, etc. would be good here, because you get the extra personnel, and the soldiers, of course, at the very least, we know that they should be able to handle themselves in a confrontation, but you have retired police officers with that extra experience of policing who could take point on, the communications, on certain aspects of the decisions before it reaches to a confrontation to guide the retired soldiers better, as well as to interact with the public in general, to let them understand what the expectations are, what is required of them, etc., etc. I think that, in theory, because we know that customer service from the police is not perfect, but still, in theory, that would be better. And I hope that's what it is. If it's literally just by Defense Force personnel, and I mean, that means soldiers, Coast Guard, etc., etc., I'm a little concerned if that's all is being earmarked, because one of our callers repeatedly calls in asking for retired police officers to be put to work. Now, in what capacity? I don't know if it's going to be as, sentries over infrastructure projects and community development projects, or if it will be, advisory work or administrative work. But at the end of the day, the fact that there are some retired police officers who are willing to contribute in some way, and it seems as though no one is willing to engage them enough, I don't like the fact that we're going to the Defense Force to deal with ultimately what is a non-military issue. No matter what the level of violence is yet, it's a non-military issue. And we'll have more on that later on. Let's go to the next clip I want to get into, where the Minister of National Security, he had more pointed things to say about, I guess you could say, his direct political opponent. And he had some interesting things to say on the former commissioner. Let's get the Minister of National Security in the second clip.
So this is, when I talk about regional cooperation, This is what I'm talking about. You see the fellow who I just talked, the noisy little half-educated, egotistic, narcissistic little noisemaker? While he was commissioner, and the Prime Minister has already told us that was the biggest mistake that he has ever made. But one man's trouble is another man's thing, because I could tell you, one of my biggest achievements, as far as I'm concerned, was to see the back of Gary Griffith as Commissioner of Police in Trinidad and Tobago. They could say what they want. Because while he was commissioner for 3 short, dirty years, he granted close to 8,000 firearm licenses. And that meant plenty guns of all descriptions. That meant more guns and more licenses than all the other police commissioners add up together since independence. So I have here an affidavit sworn and filed by the Commissioner of Police, Madam Erla Christopher Yearwood, in a certain matter. And let me tell you the name of the matter, because this is public record. Tawfiq Ali and the Firearms Training Institute, his business, and the Commissioner of Police, where he took the commissioner to court for not granting import license for millions of rounds of ammunition. I think 3.7 million rounds of ammunition. The commissioner, of course, exercising her authority and following the policy of the government, which is a restrictive policy, which says we will grant firearms to those who could show that they have some risk and they need it, but not just give it out like hot bread. But whenever we say that, they say we are attacking legal firearm owners, which is not the case. We have always, long before the noisy little boy, long before we have been granting firearm licenses in this country. So no Johnny come lately could come and tell we different. But there was disquiet, she says, there was disquiet in the public media of allegations of corruption in the granting of increased numbers of firearm users' licenses. There's the commissioner present speaking about previous commissioner activity. Several fact-finding inquiries were established, as you all know. She went on to say, grave concerns about the increasing level of gun violence in the country, including civilians being licensed to have several high-powered rifles in their possession. The arbitrary granting of FULs, all kind of Tom, Dick, Harry, and their dog and their cousin get firearm license in this country. And I could call names, so it would not be a wholesome thing to do. But I could tell you, it includes people with conviction, it includes deportees, and it includes people who superintendent of police in their divisions say absolutely not, based on what we know in this division, and they were still granted license by that commissioner of police.
Now, to some extent, I don't know if enough actual evidence to back up these claims is out there in the public. The government is making these claims, it implies a lot, right? I will say this, I still don't agree how the meritless situation was handled, because, if only because, the second go around, Gary Griffith's name was on the list, and they just did the process correctly, and he was no longer Commissioner of Police. So as I said before, why did you do it that way the first time? And maybe it was an unprecedented situation, and they did an oopsie. And by an oopsie, I mean made a very big, I don't want to say what I want to say, mistake. But the opening salvo of rhetoric at the start of that clip, I would just advise the minister, don't go there. Why go there? It goes back. We always say this. Why go there? Stick to the truth and leave the colorful language alone. Because to some extent, unless it could be refuted, and again, I think it's very unfortunate that we're kind of left in this no man's land where right now it's a he said, she said. If this is true, well, there's some very unfortunate things going on, but it also might explain a lot. And I'll get into that after this next clip with the Prime Minister following up with regards to certain aspects of what the government perceives as an illegal operation with the granting of FULs and ammunition sales.
And I saw this big advertisement in the newspaper for assault weapons. And I immediately called the minister to ask, are we giving people assault weapons as their personal protection units? The minister said no, because as far as I'm concerned, that is not government policy. But the policy had been so changed surreptitiously that dealers were getting permission to import into this violent society as many guns as they can, and millions of rounds of ammunition were being made available. And I have absolutely no doubt that a significant amount of the ammunition that were approved to come into this country through legal means are ending up in the hands of the criminals of Trinidad and Tobago. I'll give you one example. A man was killed in St. James a few months ago at close range, and they fired 63 bullets at him. You know why a criminal will do that? Because bullets are easy to get. And you see them every day, well armed. But the one thing that is not in short supply is bullets. And when you ask yourself, what exactly was the Commissioner of Police doing, granting one dealer permits to bring in 20 million rounds of ammunition? There was something that was not happening in this country. Police was supposed to go out on a regular basis to check arms and ammunition dealers so they can account for every gun and every bullet that comes into this country. The police was not doing that. And as a result of that, I have to come to the conclusion that there was significant leakage because there was money to be made. No unlicensed illegal gun holder could walk into any dealer and buy ammunition because it has to be recorded to get it. But on the black market, it was available in large amount. But the most frightening thing about it, as we've been examining this problem and this problem area, we go to the customs to verify which of those permits was used to bring in ammunition, so we could know how much of the 20 or the 10 or the 5 million came in, and where it is now, and how it is being sold. You know what the answer is? People of Trinidad and Tobago, do you know what the answer to that examination is? We don't know. We don't know. There was one dealer, when they went out recently to examine the dealer, he had no books, as the law requires, eh? And when I asked, where are your books? He said there was a theft and his books were stolen. That is what was going on in this country. There were people who were given permission to become arms dealers even without applying. Even without applying, they were given permission to be arms and ammunition dealer in this country. So this little island is awash with ammunition in particular, which came in here through the wiles of people who saw the profit potential of ammunition and the fuel dealings in this country.
And the thing is, on a practical level, I actually see where the Prime Minister's claim makes sense, where the Minister of National Security makes sense on this specific issue. Now, who's culpable for it? Those are the details that needs to be sorted out. However, the Minister of National Security, he pointed this out. 2016, 2017, on average, it was 1,600 firearms being brought in. That's 1,600 plus. And then in 2018, it jumped up to 5,422. Then it dipped in 2019 to 2,700. And then it went up in 2020 to 64,000, which, granted, I really can't see, unless it was all for the Defense Force, and that's a detail that they're not giving us. However, I find it hard to believe that the government will make such a severe mistake. But more importantly, ammunition importation was holding steady at 6 million in 2016, 4.7 in 2017, 2.6 in 2018, 8.3 in 2019, and then 57.2 million in 2020, and 18.8 million in what the Minister of National Security described as the little bit of 2021 where Gary Griffith was still in the commission. I don't know to what extent that is true and how the practical timelines of that year went. So we'll just go with the 18.8 million for the year. But 57.2 million rounds, and the Minister of National Security claimed a lot of those rounds were rifle rounds, 5.56, 7.62 ammunition that we see being used now. Now, a source has told me years ago, more than once, so not just years ago, but even as recently as maybe last year, that one of the issues with crime in this country was that guns were relatively cheap. Ammunition was expensive, but the Prime Minister made a very important point. And I have been lamenting this fact, so I cannot now come and try to deny this as the truth. We see people being gunned down, and it's not, 3, 4 shots, and they got hit with a bullet, and maybe they survived, or maybe they didn't, or they got shot twice, and they died. Multiple shooters, multiple rounds of ammunition, 20-something 5.56 shells and 18 7.62 shells to kill one man at relatively short ranges for weapons that could reach targets at ranges that far exceed a normal pistol. Just look at the situation that happened in the Savannah a couple of weeks ago. Just look at the Pennywise robbery a couple of years ago and how many rounds of ammunition we could just, estimate in our brains that was fired into that truck cab. Ammunition apparently was expensive in the black market, but now it seems as though criminals could just light things up without a care. So now we have to ask, is the government onto something? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean correlation is not causation. It doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But I think it's a reasonable enough argument, especially when 57.2 million, I know there's competition shooting going on, but I don't know if there's enough competition shooting to clear 57 million rounds. And to some extent, if there is a lack of a paper trail, anybody with a proper business knows one of the worst things is not having enough of a paper trail to track your stock and your sales. And if the government does not have a proper paper trail to track dealers and their sales, and then when you see anomalies, all business owners and managers who know anomalies are a sign. What's this? I have to check that out. Why is there a spike? Why is there this greater degree of something happening? What's the cause of that? How do we rectify that? With the books. But if we don't have books to rectify it with, transparency works for you, and a lack of transparency, this is the flip side to my statement, it works against you. So again, these are claims. This is not a court of law. Nothing has necessarily been substantiated in a court of law. But it does add up with what I have seen outside, independent of what the Prime Minister says, and it is alarming because the trends of crime has changed, and part of the reason for the violence could just be this. Now, I want to wrap things up with our next video with the Prime Minister, and he's speaking about the use of law in fighting crime in TNT. So let's get this last clip.
One was going to give you state of emergency. The other one, Mr. G-String, he's going to give you terrorism fight. Because as far as he's concerned, just declare anybody who have a gun or you meet with a gun is a terrorist and just wipe them off the face of the earth. Ladies and gentlemen, the laws in Trinidad and Tobago do not permit that. I and my ministers, before we could have embarked on the job of minister or prime minister, we had to swear an oath under the Constitution. And that oath is that you will observe the law and the Constitution and to do right to all manner of men. There's no exemption. So even as we are fighting crime and criminality, we have to do it within the confines of the law. And those who did it outside the confines of the law actually experimented with that. And that is why today we still have a number of cases that the government is guaranteed to lose. 8,178 persons were picked up in their use of a state of emergency in 2011. 7,044 were charged. However, there were several lawsuits filed after people who were charged were ordered released by the courts. You know why? Because there was no evidence that could stand up or was presented to the court. And then, of course, it goes on to say, in one instance, in October 2019, a High Court judge awarded $279,000 in compensation to 3 men from Kumana village, Toko, who were arrested and detained during the state of emergency. Another one from Vistabella got $250,000. But those are just examples. Listen very carefully to this. And I want you to juxtapose it against what G-String told you all last week, on Monday. In awarding the compensation to Ken Gresham, Justice Kangaloo said, and I'm quoting here what the judge said, quote, "A message had to be sent to police officers that in arresting people, they must be vigilant and not merely engage in a rubber stamping process." Unquote. In short, what the judge has said here is that willy-nilly vicify political actions by politicians will not stand up in the court, and the court will have none of it.
Left, in hindsight, I need to half apologize to the Prime Minister. Because when he called Gary Griffith the former soldier, I was like, well, that's not protocol. You know, that's not his last office, nor was it his highest office held. However, the whole thing about using the Terrorism Act, and then the justification, you know, because I believe he said something about the fact that, yes, they need to tweak the act to get rid of Provision 3 because just because they're using high-powered weapons, that should be enough to liken the perpetrator to a terrorist, which means he doesn't understand what terrorism is and why various countries around the world have terrorism acts, right? That's like saying, well, we should, I don't know, get rid of the fact about kidnapping where they kidnap somebody so we could charge anybody with kidnapping. You can't take out the fundamental part of what the crime is, so you could take a shortcut, potentially, or what you view as a shortcut in the law. That mindset is the mindset of a soldier who does not understand how a country works, how rules and laws work, legislation works, and how to properly craft policy to deal with complex situations, in part because we are a democracy with certain rights and freedoms, and you can't just try to take a shortcut to bypass those rights and freedoms by using an anti-terrorism law on street crime. Anti-terrorism units of the American military do not go into Los Angeles and New York. Delta Force does not go into New York to deal with street crime. British SAS units do not go into London to deal with street crime. So, to me, it's on the level of some of my criticisms of the former Attorney General, where your own words and your justifications to back up your initial statements are objectively bad and make you seem very unfit for the role that you either are in, or in this case, Mr. Griffith wants to be in or portray himself as. He has spoken either like a lower-level soldier who doesn't understand policy-level decision-making, or as a layman who doesn't understand the technical aspects of national security. Because I have only heard statements like this from politicians who don't have a sufficient national security background or policing background or a good grasp on legislative matters. So you don't even need to be in national security to understand the concept of why you can't take an anti-terrorism act. And of course, the Prime Minister pointed out, look what happened with the last SOE, which I did point out myself. And he linked the two together, and I think it's reasonable enough to do so. But what was not reasonable was calling the man G whatever. Let's leave the underwear nicknames off the table, please. That's not reasonable. If your political opponent wants to spew some horrible rhetoric that makes them seem crass and uncouth, whichever side of the line you're on, let them do that. Let the PNM do that if you're in the UNC. Let the UNC do that if you're in the PNM. Let the TPP do that. Let the PNM do that. Don't do it back. Even if you don't do it first, it's not justifiable. It's not. Because you just look no better than them. And the Minister of National Security, I think, was the first one that I saw. I did not look at the whole town hall meeting. I don't know if he coined the phrase. That was the first time I ever heard it. It was a cheap laugh that really and truly had nothing to do with the fact that you are the Honorable Minister of National Security or the Honorable Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, because you take the honorable part and you undermine it with utterances like that. You had a good point to make, but once you say that to start your point, half the country not going to take you out anymore. And what use is that? What use is that? And that's one of the reasons why you don't do it. But the second reason why is just sort of a principle. It is beneath the status of the Honorable Prime Minister. And if Guy Griffith wanted to do it, let him do it. And vice versa. I say the same thing to the opposition. If the government is going to do that, let them do it. Generally, though, I find the opposition starts the ball rolling most of the time. And then the PNM takes the bait and just follows them down. It's a race to the bottom, as I've said in the past. But let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to switch to more practical aspects of protecting oneself. Stay tuned to Talk About on WASN. We'll be right back.
Like many others trying to save on Carnival, Gabby thought she should go for 50% off makeup.
What about the other side?
Well, Daisy 50% off offer. So you know.
No makeup artist we don't know. What we do know is the savviest savings for Carnival are at KFC. Get a Jab Jab box, 1-piece chicken, 1 regular fries, and a biscuit for only $25.
I am the whole blinking market. What was that?
Hey, it's your girl Nadia Watson, and I'm gonna be performing live at QRC Fete Royale, the coronation. I'm bringing my whole blinking band, and we bringing the whole blinking market. Every time I take a drink, I feel like whining. What was that?
Inside a basket, I am the whole blinking market.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas, and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing now, Andy.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Paul?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. Welcome back to Tokama, ladies and gentlemen. And all the talk about guns and ammunition, it kind of makes me, wonder how it is that we're going to protect ourselves. Now, one of the things that was on the table, the legislation had to be debated, the policies had to be made, the regulations and the registrations for the applications had to go through the processes, not for firearms, but for pepper spray. And to speak to some extent on some of these aspects, we have with us, of course, our media ambassador, ASP Ashraf Ali. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Sean.
So, pepper spray. Now, I do wonder, in this day and age, at least as a tool to defend yourselves, it seems like a limited tool, although it could still have its utility for the intended purposes, of what pepper spray was. It wasn't necessarily, you're not supposed to win a gunfight with pepper spray.
Well, that is the kind
I don't think that was the intention anyway.
Exactly, and that's the type of conversation a lot of persons will want to say that, you bring a gunfight you bring a pepper spray to a gunfight, but that was never the intention. The intention of the pepper spray is to give you a means of defending yourself using a non-lethal weapon, right? And pepper spray is in fact one of the non-lethal weapons that the general public can have access to, right? So it was already proclaimed in terms of the Act Number 7 of 2021, which is the Pepper Spray Act, that gives you the opportunity to, and the guidelines to use pepper spray. The main thing right now is that a lot of questions will be asked as we come up to the carnival period, and we will keep on talking carnival safety. There's opportunities at this point in time where persons go to these events and all these type of fetes. You want to have an opportunity to defend yourself in these circumstances. And it's not for carnival per se, but generally, right? So the Act clearly defines who can apply for pepper spray, right? And one of the key things is that we need to know is that once you're 18 years and over, you can apply, generally. However, there are also contingencies for someone who is 16 or 17, under the age of 18, but the parent or the guardian of an individual must give consent in writing for those individuals to have pepper spray in the application, right? To apply for the pepper spray. Now, it is not something that a lot of persons are willing to apply for. They find it's a little cumbersome, but as time goes on, persons will become much more familiar with the process, and you may consider it. A pepper spray is only costing 100 TT for pepper spray.
Right.
Right. They are licensed suppliers as well as licensed retailers for it.
And in a confrontation, just no extra context, but in a confrontation, it's relatively easier to use a pepper spray than to say use at least certain firearms, right? You don't need quite as much training. You don't have to hit someone with a small metal bullet. You just have to spray in a general area, and it will force them away from you at the very least.
And that is the objective behind it, is that to give you an opportunity to escape your assailants.
And would it be fair, because when that was debated, that was around 2021 or so, when violence against women became an issue, because we had some high-profile murders, which some of them I don't necessarily think utilize firearms to begin with. So the idea of trying to, why armor us with pepper spray when they're guns? No, I think these are for the other types of confrontations, right? Not the wrong place, wrong time where somebody gets ambushed, but if, there's a robber with a knife maybe, or a gang of people that might attempt to surround you. And of course, for women especially, and now during Carnival, one has to be concerned about women being victimized and sexually assaulted, depending on... I don't want to say public areas just meaning out in full view of everybody, but you know what I mean. You might be walking back to your car, you get surrounded by, probably not alone, but say you and a girl, maybe 3 girls walking back to their car, and a group of men, stops them. Now they're in a very tricky situation of how to defend themselves. It's not necessarily going to be assailants armed with guns, so pepper spray in this situation could make a big difference, not so?
It is. And even law enforcement officers utilize pepper spray because it's a non-lethal opportunity to get the upper hand on offenders, right? Or even persons who become aggravated or aggressive in certain circumstances. They could de-escalate by utilizing pepper spray if they need be, as opposed to using other non-lethal devices such as the tasers, and then you go all the way escalate to a firearm. The whole objective is that you give yourself an opportunity, because if you discharge a weapon and that it hits the individual, the likelihood of the person dying or serious injury is there. But with the pepper spray, the injuries is not that extensive. You will get blood in the eyes, but it can be easily treated.
And it's important to note that if you use your firearm to defend yourself, you still have to go through an investigative process to justify that shooting.
Yeah.
And there's a gray area where subjectivity, could potentially come into play, and you might feel that you needed to do it because also you have heightened stress levels and tension. You could make a relatively wrong decision that's minor in the moment that could have bigger consequences because someone ends up dead.
And the conversation that previously you were having some conversation in terms of firearms itself, FUL holders, and the rigid assessment for firearm users, FUL holders,
right.
It's rigid because you really do not want situations where your firearm is misused in other areas. So we have the pros and cons. All right, the pepper spray is non-lethal. It's more easily the requirements are less than that of a firearm user. right? And it gives you an opportunity. It's cheaper, but let me put it this way, it's cheaper than a
Yeah.
gun in any event. And the risk of losing a pepper spray as opposed to losing your firearm is greater there's no equation
because
for that.
if your firearm gets robbed, or worse yet, lost, you are to some extent responsible for that.
So there is value in the pepper spray for the purpose of what it was intended to, for close contact engagement where your victim might be, your accused or the person trying to cause some violence to you is in close proximity to you, so you can have an opportunity to discharge the pepper spray and get an opportunity to run. Now, notwithstanding that, there is also criteria that you must follow. Not anybody could apply for a pepper spray. So I'm going to just read this for you here. Right? All persons who are 18 years and over may apply for a pepper spray, except those who are charged or convicted with any offense under Section 2 of the Firearm Amended Act. Right, for your charge for homicide, shooting with intent, all of that, you cannot apply for no pepper spray. Right. Part 2 of the Bail Act, if you know, there was some incident where you have protection order and all of those, you are aggressor in certain circumstances, you cannot apply. Or any other offense on the Domestic Violence Act. So if you know what's charged on the Domestic Violence Act, you, the individual, cannot apply for pepper spray.
Exactly.
Sorry, let me put it this way. You can apply for pepper spray.
But you're probably not going to get it.
But you would not.
And by probably, it's very probably.
Yes, the likelihood of you even getting that, having gone through that criteria, because you have to fill out the relevant documentations and declare certificate of characters and all that.
And that's a red flag, that's just going to...
Automatically, it's a red flag and you would not be granted. Based on, we have some data, I have some data here. So some of the offenses under the second schedule that I just mentioned, murder, treason, shooting with intent, inflicting injuries with or without a weapon, burglary, kidnapping. Persons who were convicted of those, charged and convicted of those offenses, they will be qualifying to act.
And it's important to note inflicting injury with or without a weapon, because one of the things is just because you have a pepper spray, you still have to be somewhat responsible for how you use it.
Exactly.
Right? So, and that's why you can't necessarily allow people, it's not just murderers, people who are prone to violence illegally, you don't want them getting their hands on this.
Yeah, and so there's some data you might be very interested in. We have 11 importers who were granted permission to import out of 109 persons who made applications.
Right.
If they didn't fit the criteria, the Office of the Commissioner and the Firearms section, after the assessment, 11 was granted. Retailers, we have 4 were granted, 17 are still pending inquiries out of the 26. And the reason for that is that there are certain documentation that they need to produce, and it is still awaiting before the finalization. Now, what is important is this. We had 459 applications thus far. 90 have been granted. So the question would ask, why we wait? Why so little? However, it is not that the police is not granting the applications or denying any applications. Persons have not fit the requirements and produced the relevant documentations.
So this is not a case where they broke the law and it's a red flag. This is just the process was not completed.
So there is a process. You have to get certificate of character. You have to do the interviews. And some persons believe that when they apply for the pepper spray, that is the end. There is a process of investigation.
If you misuse it, if you are foolish enough, I'm in a fight that I potentially started, and I'm going to bust out the pepper spray to spray him and then beat him down, that is a serious criminal charge, I would imagine.
It is an offense. It is an offense to misuse the pepper spray, because pepper spray is intended to use for self-defense, not as an offensive weapon to commit an offense. Now, persons, it may be utilized in some circumstances, because in every situation, something that is legal can be utilized for illegal means.
Right.
So that argument.
A kitchen knife is legal, but you could use it.
So that argument could go out the window, because that is not a conversation that we want to continue. We want to encourage persons to utilize the non-lethal means for defending themselves.
Because I think we shouldn't underestimate, it's non-lethal, but potentially it could still inflict a significant amount of trauma.
It could.
And depending on the circumstances around how you use it, that will turn it into an offense.
So you want
and then you could have serious repercussions based on the level of...
And one of the things that we're trying to be very cautious is in giving children under the age of 18 or, right? Because of the fact that responsibility and the risk associated with... we don't want a situation where a child under the age of 18, right, for the purpose of this conversation between 16 and 17, where they have the parents give them permission and they carry the pepper spray in school and they played with it and accidentally or maliciously maliciously with the type of violence we see in school, pepper spray a number of children and they become
or it gets stolen and misused.
So there are some criteria with respect to it in terms of, I mean, notwithstanding it is not a firearm, but there are criteria. And I'm saying that the general public use this opportunity, notwithstanding the issues that we have, but use the opportunity, go to the nearest police station, there's application forms, put in an application to get the firearm. If you know that the application for the FUL, under the firearm section for the pepper spray, put in the application with pepper spray. Give yourself an opportunity to defend yourself by the use of the pepper spray.
And this also might be a better way to defend your home. Not all home invasions will be firearms. And unfortunately, this might be where maybe if there were like some conflict training courses, because I think one of my big issues with self-defense is people really need to understand it's a judgment call and you might put yourself more at risk if you fight back depending on what you're facing. But sometimes when you have burglars, home invaders, robbers who aren't armed with firearms, right? They might be armed with cutlasses or whatnot. They might even be more aggressive because of that, because they don't have a gun, right?
Yeah.
It might be good to have that as an option. You could drive them out of your house without actually having to physically interact with them. You could just put a wall of pepper spray in front of you and then they will have to now reconsider, well, I don't know if my cutlass is going to help me through that necessarily.
It will disorient the individual for some time.
Could be the difference for a police response.
And all you need, not even for a police response, give you an opportunity to escape.
That too, yes.
You see, the situation is not for response. The pepper spray, the intent of the pepper spray is to give victims or potential victims opportunity to get away from there.
Right. So in general, let's just make it clear. It's not you pepper spray someone until they're withering in agony.
No.
Right? Because you can never know what happens. They might swing wildly with a knife or a blade, right? And you still get injured. I use it to kind of disengage, to force them away from me so that either they run. If they run out of my house and run and escape, well, that's all well and good. But most likely, I have to consider making my escape. Don't try to stand my ground. You know, things could be replaced, but life is different. And if I have a family now, I could use it to try to give them time to escape, and then I escape.
Yeah, and that is the intention. So in the night, you're in a car park, somebody probably approach you.
Right.
And in that circumstance, you discharge the pepper spray, you give yourself some time to
maybe get in your car.
Not even to get in the car.
Or to just run.
Just run back into a location. Or if you get to be opportunity to get into your car and drive off, well, okay. So the opportunity is there. You give yourself some chance.
Would you advise anybody who is in a situation like that? I guess it might seem obvious, but some people might in the moment choose not to do it for whatever reason. If you're in a situation, you discharge pepper spray, you should go and make a report to the police as soon as possible.
Obviously. Because remember,
I know it seems obvious when we discuss it, but you well know when people are in the moment, they might be afraid, they don't want to deal with this anymore. All kind of things might go through their head. But on many levels, it's important, one, for the police to know that, A, an attempted crime happened, but also, two, that any use of your pepper spray probably has a record behind it.
And exactly. So even though, if you discharge the pepper spray against an assailant, it is important, as you mentioned, to go to the police station, make a report. Reason being also is that we have a record of that you discharge your pepper spray against an individual, but then we may also check the medical institution because that individual may have to go and get some medical treatment depending on the concentration and the volume of the pepper spray that entered the person's eye. So they may have to go and get medical treatment. right? And that will give us maybe give us an opportunity to apprehend that individual and ask some questions as how come you get pepper spray, and we have a report here, because that is not something you will get general, because if you discharge.
Yeah.
So
especially now when it's not widespread.
So there are opportunities what we have to use with respect to that. But I agree. Once persons would discharge their pepper spray, make a report.
With my last question, because I mentioned this before, with, we have importers and retailers, do they have like training institutions that might teach civilians not necessarily how to win a fight against assailants, but how to either de-escalate or escape or do all of these things? But most importantly, my fear is when to fight, when to engage, or when to just don't even attempt to fight. Because you know what sometimes people say, just give them what they want. You see a gun in your face, right? No amount of self-defense training, karate, judo, right? There's a gun in your face, you could have a knife in your pocket. Why take that risk? Give them what they want. Phone, wallet, jewelry, because your life is so precious. Do they have courses to kind of...
So part of the requirement to get the pepper spray is competence training into any context of understanding what the pepper spray is about, how to use the pepper spray, the proper procedures in utilizing the pepper spray. So you will get that training with the dealers and institutions. Once you satisfy the requirements, and you will have to get a competence level.
And my last question.
And then you will get finally you will get the permit.
And then my last question. Just, am I wrong in thinking that to some extent using pepper sprays for most people might be easier than even a taser? Because with a taser, you still need to get contact with the wires, whether it's and some tasers, the hand tasers, it's a melee device that you have to get, within reach of the assailant.
Well, we do in fact use devices.
The police do?
No, generally we use devices of that nature that follow the same principle. For example, deodorant spray, you just press.
Right, okay.
And a mist come out.
Right.
Insecticides, other items and other household items. So you have the principles already of point and spray. It's just for you to understand now that pointing and spraying this is not a deodorant anymore or some perfume or anything like that. It is pepper spray, and the discharge of it is not nilly-willy. So you understand. So it's just simple understanding of the device and how you use the device.
And finally, your last words there implies, folks, don't try to use your perfume or your deodorant as a makeshift alternative. The results may vary, and cannot encourage people to even consider doing that because of that, right? So stay safe. I want to take a short break. When we come back, we'll open the phone lines. I know we're going kind of late, but let's just take a 2-minute break, and when we return, we'll hear from you, the viewer. Stay tuned.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen, and we just had a conversation on pepper spray and its limitations, the practical benefits, and some people might be underestimating the need of it. I think it's quite interesting. It's kind of like COVID when we took it for granted that other diseases, you know, they were just on the back burner somehow magically while COVID was going on. And now that the murder rate is front and center, we need to remember that not all crimes are firearm-related violence and not all crimes are firearm-related murders, which is why pepper spray sales, deployment, usage, subscriptions, you know, one would think there's a need there because there are other things to be concerned about. But with that said, we open up the phone lines now. The numbers are up on your screen. I know we're late, but you could still call in to speak about anything that I mentioned earlier, or you could have any questions with regards to procedures. I know that there's always going to be some minor gray areas maybe where people have questions over what to do with procedures and paperwork and stuff like that. Of course, you could ask the ASP whatever you would like to ask. And now we reach the point where I'll ask you a question and then potentially we'll have phone calls and that question will have to be scrapped. But with regards, now I am of the belief that pepper spray is easier to deploy for most people than tasers. But are tasers, what's the status with that? Because we don't really hear, I haven't heard much about that recently.
That's more within law enforcement.
It has not necessarily been.
No, that has not come out for public use. Right? The general public doesn't have access to tasers. That's a law enforcement tool.
What about? Because I know, like in the States, you know, at least
those are
like hand tasers.
Any sort of tasers, any sort of tasers is in fact prohibited, as well as pepper spray is also considered a prohibited weapon.
Right. That's why you need.
That's why you need a permit to carry. Same thing with a taser, right? But it is not going to be granted to the general public for the use of tasers. Tasers brings a different dynamic altogether with respect to the use of electricity on an individual.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be very cautious and be trained in how to utilize that, because any misuse or how I should say it, I wouldn't say misuse, any use of a taser or discharge of a taser, the ramifications or the implications on the individual, because everybody is made up differently, can have some, in some circumstances, may have some detrimental effects. We don't know. So that's why we be very cautious with it too.
Because we just had the incident with the young boy being assaulted, and he suffers from epilepsy, and the assault triggered some seizures, right? So is that one of the aspects with tasers that would make it?
There are possibilities that, remember when you tase an individual, you really do not know that individual's medical history.
Right.
It's an opportunity for a non-lethal weapon to get the assailant under control.
Because then it could also be a heart condition situation as well.
So you have to be very cautious with respect to it. That's why when we tase an individual has been tased, there are procedures to immediately carry that person to seek medical attention to ensure that there is no situation, nothing untowards would have happened to the individual.
Also, like, I'm sure people have seen this before, and I assume you've seen it, where you'll see demonstrations done abroad, right? It could be military personnel or law enforcement personnel. One of the things they do is they tase recruits or trainees so they will understand. But the key point is there'll be mats, there'll be two people to catch the person when they get tased, because they basically turn into a brick and fall over.
Well, unfortunately,
like a cut log, right? And the back of your head could be where the force more or less goes.
Exactly. Unfortunately, there are officers who went through that process. I remember I said officers. Fortunately for me,
it sounds like you had a little bit of experience.
I have not been teased at this point in time.
Okay.
Nor have I been pepper sprayed. But there are officers in certain sections that utilize it more on the front line. Right. That would have gone through the procedure. So they are now familiar with how they feel and understand how it works, as well as get an experience of it. So when you discharge, you have an understanding that if I remain more than certain amount of time, what implications it could have on the individual. So generally, generally, and the same thing applies to the pepper spray. Even if you're using the pepper spray and just keep on using the pepper spray.
Does law enforcement also utilize pepper spray as
Yes.
one of the anti-tasers? And I ask this because I think it's important for people to realize, you know, and then if you're in a situation with police and they're threatening you with a taser or a pepper spray and not a firearm, don't think you're gonna be man and you're gonna take it and you still want to act belligerent. Because yes, we see some videos, they have some confrontations abroad where, you know, the suspect or the individual was able to be unfazed by those devices, but that might not be for you. You might get the worst end of the stick, and depending on the situation, if you do not do your part to de-escalate, then you only have yourself to blame if law enforcement has to hit you with that.
Exactly. So yeah, so law enforcement does in fact use tasers, well, just pepper spray and tasers, batons, and firearms, as the case may be. So it's based on the use of force policies. We want to be able to have opportunities before we reach the final, the deadly force use, which is the firearm. Right? So you want all the opportunities to de-escalate a situation and get the situation under control. So given that analysis, I mean, the civilian population and the general public would not have access to all those means, right? So we're giving them an opportunity for pepper spray, and pepper spray is in fact wide-ranging in terms of
the types.
Yes, the types, but they have certain types that you could purchase here. But what I'm saying is that there are situations in multiple situations where violence could be against you. You may be fear of a certain location. Somebody might be threatening you, or attempted to rob you, or wanted to commit some other violent act against you. Any opportunity that you have, which the pepper spray is intended to give, is what you need, right? As I always say, you need a fighting chance.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is another way to add to your fighting chance, increase your opportunity to escape. So you apply for the pepper spray. The criteria, go through the criteria. Once you are not have any illegal intent to utilize this pepper spray in any illegal way, I don't see an issue why when you apply for the pepper spray and they actually criteria and you fill out all the criteria and you fill all the category, whether or not you would be granted pepper spray or not.
And better to use that if you have it than say a knife, because I know some people like to have knives to defend themselves.
Exactly,
yeah,
but
that's asking for trouble.
Sometimes let's put it this way. Sometimes a lot of persons in their bags, like females, they have all sort of devices.
Right.
Things like hand sanitizers, creams and perfumes and all kind of thing. Pepper spray becomes a part of your accessories now. Understand? Because let's put it, that was the intention of it.
I guess it's just somebody's gonna start to decorate their pepper spray.
Because at the end of the day, because of the amount of violence against females, and it's almost 63 out of the numbers is a higher number of females that was granted permit as opposed to males, right? 63 as opposed to 23. 23 males and 63 females out of the numbers. And we have out of that, we only had one person who was denied pepper spray because they didn't fit the requirements that was asked to fit, right? So
yeah, it's a good equalizer.
Yeah. Right.
Any day, no matter how much social equality and physical confrontation equality is two different things. Most women are not going to necessarily be able to physically fight off, and especially depending on how much larger the man may, not always, but still.
So that is an opportunity, and it gives you a greater chance.
Well, we started late, so I don't think we're going to get any calls today, but I do want to switch gears. Just in general, I know that people ask for Defense Force, to help the police, and that the details around that and the I guess you could say the usefulness of it and the politics around it notwithstanding, there are members of Defense Force that are there currently with the Interagency Task Force working with the police right now, right?
We do have officers from the Trinity Defense Force working currently working with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in different areas. They do joint patrols with us.
And they don't necessarily patrol on their own. They would do joint patrols with the police.
Yeah, they do joint patrols with the police.
Right, but is it widespread or is it just like a targeted measure?
It's specific areas and based on the need and the availability of certain operations that is taking place. They lend support in certain areas. Currently, the interagency task force, where we have the defense force officers, do in fact work with them on a regular basis there.
Okay, and I guess, to your knowledge, like what really would be because as people have been asking for it, but we haven't really seen it done maybe to the extent that people want it. What might be required to get more officers to work with law enforcement? Would it need a state of emergency
Defense force officers?
Yeah, or are there levels potentially?
That is a decision from the National Security Council in collaboration with the Office of the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defense Staff. It all depends on the circumstances in the country, right? Yes, if it goes to a state of emergency, the defense force will be deployed. That's a given. However, when you look at it from civil society and protecting the civil society, the defense force is limited in certain aspects, right? So that's why they work together with the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. So Defense Force work with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in certain areas. Now, you would see a lot of Defense Force officers coming out for this carnival period because of the volume of persons in and out, and they will be working alongside the police in certain areas. They'll lend support to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in a lot of different areas.
Do they carry non-lethal weapons or not really? Because that's not usual in their training.
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
When they come out with their standard issues. I'm not aware of those officers being deployed with non-lethal weapons.
And I think it's important for people to understand. This is an assumption that I've had, but correct me if I'm wrong. So if you have, say, 5,000 police officers to patrol at any one point in time, and you put 5,000 defense force officers, you're not necessarily doubling your patrols. You could reinforce your patrols.
You just have 10,000 bodies of law enforcement personnel on the ground. The logistics behind it, it's a little bit difficult because there's some logistical challenges that both entities will be facing. Right, and those are in-house arrangements and logistical challenges that we have to treat with in both departments. That's not for the general public.
Yes, it's the boring stuff that the general public may take for granted when you have two services trying to work together.
Exactly, and what the public wants to see is the presence. Yes, the presence will be there, but we have to iron out all the other logistical issues in terms of getting the physical appearance on the streets. There is in any event,
just deploying them out there.
In any event, working the Defense Force, Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force together with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has always been partnering. Right? The level of partnership that persons are asking for, it's a different conversation because they want a greater presence and they want the Defense Force officers on the streets themselves. That cannot work the way that it should, that person's expecting unless we have a state of emergency and something happens.
Right.
So when they work with the police, they work in joint operations, or they're doing, and joint operation might be working together in patrols.
I think that's important to note, right? As much as we might want it, it's not so simple to just, the Prime Minister goes on the phone and say, deploy the army, and they just deploy, the next day, and it's done. It'll take a lot to get through because they're not police. So there's a lot of minor complications that make such an exercise very challenging, and you don't want to make mistakes because this is not the sort of thing. This is not deploying library cards or crossing guards. This is something else.
It's a lot to look at. I understand the cry for the public in terms of the one presence for the Defense Force and the Army, because they have the opinion the criminal elements will view the Army in a different light as opposed to how they view the police. There's a conversation that we can argue that conversation on several different forums.
But one thing I would just say is, as much as I say, you have to be careful deploying a force that's meant for fighting in a police environment. The flip side is, if you, whether you're a criminal, common citizen or whatever, you need to realize It's one thing if you want to be belligerent with a police officer. Don't be foolish to be belligerent with a soldier, because even if he's wrong, you don't want to face the consequences on your end.
And there are a lot of, and like I said, there's a lot of
And that's if he's wrong.
There's a lot of
even if.
There's a lot of logistics in terms of that, both
Yeah.
manpower logistics as well as other logistics in getting this type of thing out. Now, we continue to say that we're not working together, but there are a lot of Defense Force officers in the entire Defense Force umbrella that is in fact working alongside police that the general public is unaware of.
Right.
But they are working,
Right.
and they are working in different areas. Person just want to see the physical presence. That is the only satisfied.
So we have a very, very late caller
caller.
that will take for maybe 30 seconds to a minute from Cascade. Good morning, caller.
Good morning to you, sir. Good morning. This is a question for the commissioner. Well, I call this gentleman commissioner, forgive me. So, could you tell me whether it is that women would be given, as it were, preference in the award of the pepper spray than men?
So
Can I stay on the line?
Yeah, sure, you can stay. So I am not saying women will be given preference, but it depends on the amount of the application that we made. For the general information right now, based on the number of applications that was made and that was granted, we have 63 females and 32 males that was in fact granted permission to use pepper spray. So if you look at it from that perspective, a lot of the females applicants did in fact apply, and the majority of those almost all the females who applied got permission to use the pepper spray.
Because from where I sit, a vendor, a street vendor, a double vendor, all these people, I certainly believe require a pepper spray. So I was wondering whether men, for the first time at last in Trinidad, would be given equal opportunity to women.
The opportunity is there. Both male and female has the opportunity to apply. Once both of them fit the requirements, it's not a preference to say, okay, we're going to give a male as opposed to the female. It's about the requirements. Once you satisfy the requirements, you will be granted the use of a pepper spray. And I agree with you, sir. A lot of persons in different areas can utilize the opportunity to get pepper spray, as you mentioned now, those vendors,
yourself, yeah.
right? Once
Lottery boot operators, a number of people.
Yeah,
but sir,
caller,
may I put one final question on this?
Very
pepper
quickly.
spray? Do I hear you say then that women are in the 63-23, I think it was you said?
Yes.
Is it that the women are demonstrating a higher acumen in terms of literacy?
I wouldn't say that's
I think, caller, right now the statistics are probably too small to make a conclusion.
All I can say to you is that the number of females that applied for
so we're talking at
pepper
the start
spray.
of the process. The
Yeah,
applications were higher.
They were higher. So it's a lot of females, because really and truly it was intended for females.
That's when it started.
Females to have a level of protection for themselves.
Thank you, caller. We are way over time, so we'll have to end that there. Like I said, that's the applications. The applications were mostly female. I don't think that really is an indicator of how the policy, if there's any policies that we don't know about over how it's granted. So let's just wait and see. And hopefully all those who need it will have a chance to subscribe and will get it. And hopefully it will have a positive impact. Hopefully it won't have any unintended consequences. But we have to end the show there today. I want to thank the ESP for joining us. Of course, Mr. Cascade /Manchester Port of Spain /Woodbrook. Thank you for calling. This is Talking About a WESN. Have a good day, as my co-host always says. We will see you tomorrow morning with the good lady. Bye-bye.